Well, welcome back to the second of our fiction sections. We had a fabulous conversation with Rosamund Lupton and Diane Chandler, chaired by Rachel Schofield, who I think Jeremy knows. We're now going to take that on. So they were very much looking at things close to home, set in Chiswick. Jeremy's new novel is not set in Chiswick. It's set an awfully long way away. And in fact, it moves around from various place to place. And he's going to tell us all about it. It's called The Diver and the Lover. The publishers say it's a compelling story of love, art, politics and sacrifice that explores the lengths we'll go to for who or what we love. So, Jeremy, where did the idea come from?
Well, I wanted to write a love story. And my book, essentially, the 1950s part of it, starts with two sisters from Hull traveling to Spain, and the youngest one finds love. So there's that. But at the center of the book is a painting. And the painting, I can show you actually, I've got it right here.
Okay.
The painting is one I discovered about 5 years ago. I say discovered, I should really have known about it. But it's a painting by Salvador Dali called Christ of St. John of the Cross. Now, I might need to go around the back of my sofa to show you this. But this painting hangs in the Kelvingrove Museum in Glasgow.
Move it back a bit.
Yeah, is that good?
Yeah,
that's better. Got a bit of lights on it. Okay,
yeah.
So the interesting thing about this, we can come back to, is I should have known all about this painting, because I think now it's the best painting since the Second World War by any artist anywhere in the world. But I discovered it through a kind of strange way. Shall I tell you how?
Yep.
Okay. I present Eggheads. I was in the BBC Glasgow studios, which you know so well, Torin. And we had a question about which artist invented the lobster telephone. And you all know that straight away, the telephone with the lobster on the cradle. And I said, oh gosh, I'm not sure. And the Eggheads, of course, then start doing a lecture. It's Salvador Dali, and he was born in 1904 and he died in 1989 and da-da-da. And of course, I thought, well, I know Salvador Dali a bit, because like most of us, we've seen those pictures, the weird pictures of the melting clocks. We've seen the burning giraffe. We've seen that swans reflecting elephants, all the crazy stuff. And I said that to the Eggheads in the studio, and they said, but in later life, about the age at just younger than I am now, he tried to go a bit classical, and he did this stunning work. And they said, it's round the corner. So it was a bit of a packed fortnight. We had to do 66 shows in 2 weeks, and we had one day off in the middle of Saturday. And I thought, I'll go and see it. And I went and stood in this tiny room at the Kelvingrove Gallery and Museum in Glasgow. And I thought, this is really an astonishing painting, because, well, for many, many reasons. I mean, when you look at works of art that show Christ, obviously you look normally from a human perspective, from the ground. And this one, you see him, try to keep the light of it, you see the top of his head first. So it's almost the view of Christ from space. And the reason it's called Christ of St. John of the Cross is because it was inspired by a sketch by a monk called St. John or Juan of the Cross in 1570. And he, on a sketch no bigger than a Post-it note, he drew this little pencil sketch of Christ on the cross from above, and it was regarded as a terrible blasphemy. He was beaten up and thrown in jail. So Dali had basically doubled down on the blasphemy nearly 400 years later. So I just thought, gosh, I'd like to do something around this painting. Long answer, I know.
And did that have to be a novel, or you just were fascinated and that gave you... How did that lead on to the novel?
Well, so you've got to be standing in the Kelvingrove. And by the way, I was there last weekend because I brought my family up to see it for the first time. So I stood in the room with the painting, and they gave me 20 minutes before anyone came in. So it's a very special experience for me. And yeah, I stood there and I looked at it and I thought, I need to know the story behind this. And then I did what we all do in galleries. I turned slightly to see the plaque, and the plaque is not that near the painting. It was at the time no bigger than a playing card, and it was just over my right shoulder. And it said Dali used the world famous stuntman Russell Saunders to pose his Christ. So I thought, what would that have been like? You know, I then began to research the life of Russell Saunders a bit. And in the 20s and 30s, I mean, he was born in 1919. So by the time he was the Canadian national diving champion at the age of 19, it was in the 1930s. And he was an incredible acrobat, an athlete and diver. But in Hollywood films in those days, if you were a stuntman, you'd be lucky to escape alive from that film set. The greatest ever was a guy called Yakima Canute, and he was in a film called Stagecoach, where basically there are 6 horses pulling a carriage, and he falls between them, gets trampled by them, the carriage runs him over, and he comes out the back, and he's still alive to talk about it. And Russell Saunders was inspired by that film, and he became a stuntman. But of course, doing movies in Hollywood as a stuntman is very different from when the phone goes and someone says, can you come over to Spain to pose for the artist? And so I wondered what that would be like from Russell Saunders' point of view. So he comes to Catalonia in 1951, and he meets Dali, and this is now my fiction. And Dali's agent says, okay, you know what's going on. He wants you to pose as Christ. And Saunders says, well, hang on, I thought this was just a portrait of me. And they said, no, we're going to hang you from the studio ceiling. Because what actually happened with Russell Saunders is he was hung from a gantry in the ceiling of Dali's studio in order to pose for this painting. And he did it, of course, in real life. But in my book, he storms out. And Dali has to find somebody else to do this incredible, phenomenal task. And he chooses a young waiter at a local hotel with whom my heroine, the first sister I mentioned, is in love. And then we're into the story of love.
That is absolutely fascinating. You always wanted to do a love story. This was the trigger to do that, or did it come in a different order?
Yeah, I always wanted to write a fiction, and I always thought that the thing to do with, I mean, I love Ian McEwan. I love books that are set very much in the present day. And Rachel, you mentioned, was interviewing, about a story based in Chiswick and so on. I sort of wanted to go back and find out about something that happened in the past and set a fictional set of characters within a real event. And it's very interesting when you do that, because you straight away come up against the question of how much you can adjust the real story. So, I'm going to assume that Russell Saunders in real life really did not resign. He stayed on the cross, and then at some point he was allowed down from the studio ceiling, and then Dali sold the painting. I can mention about what happened to the painting and how it was sold to Glasgow in a moment. But can I create a story around that in which Saunders resigns, but it's in his, or walks out, but it's in his interests and in Dali's interest to cover up the fact, because the PR is great that you've got this stuntman doing the painting. So my version would fit with the reality that we know. But I was talking to Robert Harris about this, the novelist, and I said, how tight do you have to be to what you know is true in a book? I mean, to take an example, Salvador Dali, as I mentioned, died in 1989. I wouldn't want to have him dying in 1953. That would be ridiculous. And Robert Harris said, gosh, I mean, everything you've got to be completely straight with. He said, I wrote a book called Enigma. And Harris's book obviously is about the Enigma machine. And he started to get complaints, why isn't Alan Turing in it? And he said, well, he couldn't be in it because he wasn't there in the particular 6 months that I set the book in. He was in America. And I said to Robert, we'll have him come over. He said, no, you can't do that. So there's a constant issue when you set a book based in real events, how much you can move them around. And actually, I haven't moved them around that much. In the end, what happens with the painting is this, just to get back to how it ends up in Glasgow. It's an astonishing story. In my book, an old guy called Sir Thomas Honeyman turns up, and he's a big Dali enthusiast, and he turns out to run this gallery. And this is what happened in real life. And he goes to Dali and he says, I love your paintings. I love your work. I know you're the greatest, even though he hadn't necessarily in his own lifetime been recognized as such. And I want to buy your painting. And Dali said, well, I've just finished this. And he shows him this extraordinary thing, and I'll give it to you for £12,000. And yes. So Tom Honeyman says, oh, I'm going to do a Scottish accent. No, we can't, we can't pay that much for it. The gallery won't allow it. So he knocks him down to 8,200, right? And he gets the painting. And then not only that, there's then a massive hoo-ha in Scotland in the 50s of why have you spent that much money on art by someone who's not Scottish? And I'm sorry, every time I do a Scottish accent, it comes out as Sean Connery. And so poor man ends up caught in this row, and then 3 years later loses the job he loves. Now you go, and I was talking to the chap who take at the weekend who has the job of running the gallery, probably the best job in the world. He said there was a story that last year the Spanish government tried to buy it for 80 million. He said, oh, it's worth much more than that. So you're talking at least 100 million for this painting that was bought for 8,200. I mean, that's incredible to me.
No, absolutely. And you actually start in the present day with a prologue in the gallery with a security guard.
I do, and I mean, I don't think telling you what happens in the first chapter is a spoiler of any kind. The security guard has had a very bad day. He's been through a whole load of training on who you look out for in terms of people who might damage paintings. And I did a bit of research into this, and it's very interesting. If you look back at all the people who damaged paintings in the past, they tend to be usually sort of academic, scholarly types who are obsessed with the painting for some reason. So they're quite hard to spot. And they can also be making a political point. And he's been through all this training, and he's failed to spot that this old woman who was going to see the painting every day and standing in front of it, and who might have been in the gallery for 30 or 40 times, and who they all thought was benign, basically had it in her. I mean, I mustn't say too much because it comes out at the end, but it had an outrageous act in her, which would lead to her doing damage to the painting. And so it starts with this fellow Craig Maskell, who's the gallery supervisor, who's having to write a report on how this has happened, and he knows he's going to lose his job over it because he kind of knows it's his fault. And the tragic thing is that he's fallen in love with this painting himself. So he although he's not an educated man, he makes any excuse he can just to go and stand in that room and see it, you know. And yes, I was in the room at the weekend. So it's funny how, although the book is about the two girls, I'll call them, young women really, and although it's about their heart and their love and the diver who's the American waiter, gosh, the center of gravity keeps coming back to the painting. Because I think in the end, the question that the book probably asks is whether it's worth it. Whether if you destroy someone to create this work of art, it's been worth it. And without giving too much away, it's an outrageous act that befalls the painting, but it's also an outrageous act that befalls the diver. And out of the end of it, you get this extraordinary work of art. And you're challenged, I think, maybe by the idea that maybe actually it's worth it. Maybe we're not worth ourselves as much as the work of art. I remember when there was a scandal over the Three Graces in Edinburgh. I don't know if you remember that, which was a great big sort of white marble statue of three women dancing around. And I think it had been maybe bid for 50 million or something by a foreign gallery. And there was a big comment about whether Scotland should pay 50 million quid to keep these Three Graces. And of course, all of my listeners on Radio 2 said, well, of course they shouldn't, because 50 million quid will buy you 27 dialysis machines, which always seems to be the currency. And then someone rang up and said, no, because we're in 100 years, we're all dead, but the paintings, the Three Graces are still there. So they're worth more than us. And I thought, wow, that's a really difficult thought, you know, and that's the thought at the center of this book. Yeah. And also, I should say, you know, I've got two young girls. So writing about two sisters coming of age was really interesting to me, because I think that if I'm a 55-year-old white bloke, the last thing I want to be doing is writing a book about a 55-year-old white male. I just think you have to be able to do characters who are not you. That's the absolute first base with writing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So the sisters go to Spain. Did you have to do lots of research there? That sounds fun.
I've been to Spain a few times, and I ended up with the research actually was not so much traveling in Spain now, but trying to work out what Spain was like in the 1950s under Franco, which is almost political research. So the backdrop to it is, and as I sort of looked at this, I thought, gosh, I think most of us have slightly blanked that era of modern European history, because it's a little bit complicated. Because what happened was, forgive me for this, but again, Torin, you know all this stuff, I'm sure. But there was an elected government in Spain, and it was toppled by Franco, who was a fascist. So the military came in, backed by the church, the Catholic Church, and installed Franco as the dictator. And this is the 1930s. And quite a lot of people from this country actually went to fight against him. So it was a very, very odd conflict. And you got from it actually another great work of art, which was Picasso's Guernica, I think, was inspired by some of what went on in that period. And an attack on a particular village. Anyway, Franco takes power. Franco backs the Nazis in the Second World War, but he's smart. And when Hitler invades Russia, he can see which way the wind is blowing, and he then switches his allegiance to the Allies. So after the war, the Allies, the Americans and British are thinking, this guy, we don't like this guy, but he's kind of on our side now. And he then comes out as a rip-roaring anti-communist. So we leave him in place. So for us, the post-war period and Franco, we just thought, oh, let's let him get on with it. And of course, it's only in the 70s that Franco died and Spain became a democracy and the monarchy's restored and so on. So in 1951, when Dali is in his studio, and by the way, Dali is just moving this way and that politically. All he wants is to stay out of trouble. He doesn't really care who's running the country. He just doesn't want to be bothered. But when he's doing his painting, you've got Franco in charge, but you've got certain pockets of the country that are anti-Franco. And Catalonia, where Dali is, where my two sisters arrive, is one of them. So Catalonia, I think, would have been a really interesting place at that time in the last century, because it would have been very tense. And there were a group of people called the Maquis, who feature in my book, who are essentially the rebels, the insurgency. And they've been really pinned back. So you don't see any trace of them until they suddenly erupt in violence. And yeah, I mean, I think, you know, that's part of Spain's history. If you just Google Spanish police uniforms, you'll see an amazing transition to what we see now from those tricornios, those three-cornered hats that they had in the 40s and 50s. And you can see how military they were back then. So Spain has, it's an incredibly complicated past if you go back centuries, very, very sort of diverse, a big Muslim influence and so on. But in the 20th century, my goodness, what a great setting, I thought. As I read about it, I thought, this is really quite a tense backdrop. And my two sisters, and Ginny is the youngest sister. Ginny is essentially the central character in the book. They go into this not knowing anything about it. So Ginny goes in as a young 18, 19-year-old, and she's just basically enjoying the sunshine. And I suppose, again, the question there is, you know, is that okay? Is it okay to just enjoy the sunshine and the view and the dive and the beaches and the hotel and the breeze and the feeling on your skin? Or do you need to know that there are, years later, they're going to find mass graves, you know? Or can you ignore that? And that's a question in life for all of us, I think, you know.
And they long to meet Dali.
Yeah, well, so the two sisters I mentioned are Ginny and Meredith. And Ginny is the younger one, and she's rather carefree. The older one has been very, very badly traumatized. Her father went to the First World War, came back, had a massive, we would now say, bipolar, manic depressive episode, which ended up with him unable to care for her. Her mother had died. So she ends up basically begging for scraps and is then incarcerated, has a complete breakdown, and only meets Ginny and knows of her existence when she's in her 30s. So she's much older. And she is a very, very troubled woman. But the one thing that connects with her is the art her mother loved. And her mother, her late mother, Meredith's mother, loved the not so much the Dali art, but the surrealists, you know, all of those people at the start of the century, the 1920s, you get Dali then in the 30s and 40s, but the people who just took a pot of paint and just threw it at the wall. And of course, they became quite important in, I mean, this is not, doesn't figure in more than a paragraph of the book, but they became quite important in the 30s, because just when we were all, if we'd been around then, we would probably have been thinking these people are absolutely untalented and ridiculous and they're not doing anything of any value. And then suddenly they become public enemy number one in Nazi Germany. So Goebbels denounces these people. They have to flee the country. Some commit suicide. They went through a terrible time. And you could see that in this country, we would have looked at them with fresh eyes. So Meredith, who's troubled and traumatized and has had a terrible, terrible time in her life, her young life, understands one thing, which is surreal art. So the one thing that the sane people can't grasp, she's got. And she hasn't told Ginny this, but the reason she wants to go to Catalonia, and this spot in particular, is because she kind of knows that Dali's there, or she knows he lives there. And she never thinks she'll see him or meet him or see any of his paints. But for her, there's something very primal that going there will enrich her somehow. And when she goes, in one of the first mornings, he comes into their hotel. And he comes into the hotel with Russell Saunders, the stuntman, because they're going to have a meeting in the hotel restaurant. And Meredith suddenly sees him and is just electrified. And I think part of the relationship, the network of relationships in the book is Meredith's love for this guy who to most people made no sense at all, you know. So yeah, again, it's the power of that, I suppose, that image to connect.
Mm, mm. Have you been in that hotel? Is that a figment of your imagination? Or?
The hotel is no. Well, the hotel is a figment. Yeah, the hotel is a figment. I mean, I haven't. I was all set. Funnily enough, to go and see. Actually, I'm not even sure that I really wanted to do this because I've got. If you can look at various periods of where Dali lived and painted, and you can see them all online. I thought I'm going to go and see them, and just as I was going to go, we got hit by Corona and got locked down. And then I thought maybe I've been spared this. You know, actually walking around his house as a museum. It's in a place called Portlegat, and it's where he painted a famous picture of his wife Gala leaning into a windowsill and out of the window. I think it's just called Woman at Portlegat, actually. And so that's the view. But yeah, Corona stopped me going to his house, but in a funny way, I might be grateful because I think the museum version of Dali is not the version. Some of the stuff, he had some very, very, very odd things in there. And he had the famous Mae West sofa. He had a swimming pool shaped like a male organ. The whole house, I think actually it was probably an interior design disaster, his house. And actually I can see there are loads of people who think he's a really rubbish artist as well, actually. But the thing about him is, I mean, just if we go back to this, right, I mean, the same with Picasso, actually, that if you can do that's the wrong way around, but if you can do that level of detail in the human body, you're an artist. Now the fact that he spent a lot of time doing the surreal and the strange and the crazy, I think he was skilled up as an artist. And the interesting thing for me is the other character. Sorry, I didn't go on.
No, I was agreeing, but what I was also going to say is in the edition I've got, there is no picture of the painting. Is that deliberate?
Yes, I would. I mean, because I think in the end, the book is chiefly about the two girls. I keep saying girls, I should say young women. I put girls all through the book, and the copy editor changed it to young women because I thought, for some reason, 18, 19, I could describe her as a girl, but I don't think I can now. No, I don't think I wanted to put it in there. And actually, probably one of the great things about Tom Honeyman's deal with Dali was that he has all the image rights around the world. I mean, I did actually, funny enough, I'm doing a chat on Sunday Brunch tomorrow, and they said, can we use the painting? And I said, I think there might be image rights, but I took a selfie with it, and then I asked the gallery owner, the man who runs it these days, it's basically a civil servant, is that okay? And he said it was fine. I think if I'm in front of the painting blocking it, it's fine. But gosh, they must do well from the image rights. I don't even want to think about it, because that particular image of Christ on the cross from above has been used in a film poster, The Haunting, it's called. It's been used in Marvel Comics, have got a particular image of a superhero in exactly that pose. And even this year in 2020, the International Black and White Photography Competition was won by a photo of a woman in exactly that pose with all her hair hanging forwards. So that it's still iconic even now, and it's 70 years on.
Yes. You mentioned COVID. When did you actually finish the book, and how long did it take you to write?
It took me about 3 years to write, maybe 2.5. But I was obviously not doing it full time. And then I suppose the last year is the period, the process of copy editing and the publishers looking at it and all of that. So I never quite know. It's quite an open-ended thing. I mean, you can sometimes with a book have a year where you don't touch it, and you for whatever reason you get busy. I mean, I was doing lots of BBC stuff, and then I ended up, Eggheads kind of stopped going, sadly, and we'll see whether it restarts. But I thought I'm going to have to do something else with my time, which is a fatal thought in life, because actually when you think you're going to have to do something else with your time, you do good works in Chiswick. I thought, I'll write a book. And then I ended up doing this Channel 5 show and everything, which means I have to get up at 4:42 every morning. So I thought this is going to be really challenging. And I was really like the marathon runner, just getting towards the finishing line, thinking I'm nearly there. I've got to just plug on. And then actually when I finished it, I thought that is a story. It has got a beginning and a middle and an end. And it's really interesting talking to you about it, because this is the first really long sort of book festival type interview I've done. And it's lovely to do it among friends in Chiswick, because I'm probably sitting, I think, half a mile from you, if that. And it's really interesting to talk about it, because there's quite a lot to talk about. And I think that must be because there's quite a lot of reality in there. You know, the painting, even the monk. I mean, this poor old monk, St. John of the Cross, spent his whole life trying to persuade people not to wear shoes. I mean, what kind of life is that, you know? And then you'll be amazed at this. I went on Amazon, I looked him up, St. John of the Cross. I thought, I wonder if any of his writings are still there. There's about 5 books you can still get from Amazon. And some of the things this guy said, and bear in mind, I've only connected with him through the Eggheads question, to the gallery, to the painting, and then I look up St. John of the Cross. So I'm having a very wayward route towards this Spanish monk in 1570. He said, "Silence is God's first language." That's a great line. He used the phrase for the first time in language. He called the dark night of the soul. That's St. John of the Cross. But he was a kind of Motorhead version of monking. He wanted really the hard end, you know, shoeless, not eating, fasting, and that's why he got into trouble. And then he did the blasphemous sketch, so that's what they got him on.
That's interesting. You've written non-fiction before. We've had you for both your books at the Chiswick Book Festival. You did a wonderful turn with your iPhone, putting all the clips in about your Radio 2 show and all your listeners. Novels are a bit different, aren't they?
Well, it's funny you say that. Just this morning on this very sofa, I was trying to put together a little bunch of clips and slides and so on. I don't know. I mean, I probably won't be able to show you here, but I have managed to. Let's just do. So I don't know. I mean, I was kind of enjoying the. So that is the pic. Can you see that? Okay, that is the picture of St. John of the Cross right there. There he is. Mm-hmm. He'll gradually appear. So I found this little painting of him. Okay, gosh, this is like the most basic slideshow ever, isn't it? And that's the picture of the poster. Wait, if I just turn the lights off here, you might get a better view here. Got my little studio for you. Mm-hmm. Such a fan of these ring lights. Okay, so there, yes, that's just my illustration of the size of the original sketch. I'm tipping it so you haven't got the light in it. If I just turn this round, actually, Torin, it might be better. I can show it to you without the window in it. So that's irrelevant. Actually, that was a picture of me on the beach at Westwood Ho, because I was trying to show what happens when you go shoeless, how difficult it is. So this is me putting up a tent in Westwood Ho.
Yeah. I think I've taken on a tangent here, Jeremy.
No, sorry, I know, but you see that the point is he's a discalced Carmelite, this monk. Okay, so yep. So I was showing that I have been occasionally discalced, and this is the sketch. And actually, as I put it together to reveal it, I mean it is quite an unusual figure that this monk did, and it must be amazing if you think 500 years later here we are talking about something that must have taken him 10 minutes. I think it's incredible. And if you do look back, look at this. These are all the classic images of Christ on the cross from the 1400s. That's Mantegna. So this is my little slideshow that I'm putting together. So one day, maybe when the paperback comes out, we can actually go in a room. We'll be able to do that.
Absolutely. Okay? Absolutely. So as well as doing your research, I mean, writing a novel is very different from writing a non-fiction book. Were you consciously being a novelist in inverted commas?
I suppose the key, I've learned a lot over the years from reading other people's novels, which is the best way to learn. And by the way, if anyone wants to write, I would say the first book you should read is a book called On Writing by Stephen King, because he is the master. He's not really a literary guy at all. He just loves stories, you know. And I sometimes think when his books come out, they've probably still got loads of spelling mistakes in because he just writes so fast. So that would be my tip. I think the key, to me, there are 4 elements that you need to have tied down: plot, character, action, dialogue. Those 4 things. And one early mistake that I find, I make as a writer, which I've had to get out of, is the idea that you can substitute character with action. So you read a book and it's kind of a page turner, airport thriller or whatever, and there's somebody killed on every page, and it's just absolute carnage, and there's something happening all the time. And it's very unsatisfying because there's no real characters in it, and there's no character development. And I think I've come to the conclusion, this may just be because I'm 103, that the first, if you're going to strip out all the others, character is the thing. You've got to start with a character who's A, interesting enough to read about, and B, it is going to grow and change in some way in the book, and probably changes through things opposing her or him. So it's the journey that she makes is a series of obstacles that she's going to get through and grow as she gets through them. I think that's probably it. Yeah. But it also needs some kind of inspiration, doesn't it? Because I just think, how do people just sit down and think, I'm going to write a book today and then just write? I don't understand that. I kept doing that myself, and I just had a blank page, and I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just live my life. I'm going to wait for something to happen that will give me a story. And the something that happened was me standing in that room and seeing that painting.
Did you have a writing routine, same time every day, or?
No, I had basically a laptop that went with me everywhere, and I would open it and try to just do 20, 30 minutes if I could. And the key thing with that is not to look at what you've written before, because if you get too excited by your opening chapter, every time you turn on the laptop, that's what you're going to read. So you've just got to completely say, when I open the laptop, I'm going straight to the last line I wrote, and I'm not going back before that. If you want to read the whole of the book you've written, that's fine, but put aside a couple of days to do that at the weekend or whatever. But that's not what you're doing now. And the other thing is, obviously, electronic equipment is dangerous. No wonder Agatha Christie wrote 66 novels, because her manual typewriter was not suddenly saying, you've got a new tweet, or you've got a new post on your Facebook. Can you imagine? My dear Agatha, I would love to meet her. She's my heroine.
Yes.
She didn't, I don't think she didn't really even have a delete key. Is that incredible? The succinctness she wrote with. Now, I know they would have put lines through things and notes in margins, but they didn't do much of that. So it's possible she wrote the whole thing straight out. And she wrote amazing bestsellers. They were all 160 pages long. And I mean, people say that the real Agatha Christie scholars say there are books where the character's hair changes color. One book, someone's name changes. All kinds of stuff happens. But she was not on Twitter. And that's the danger of opening the laptop, is that you do something other than open the book. You open your social media or whatever. Yeah. So I know this will sound nuts, but what I'm speaking into now is the second device. And the second device is just for typing and zooming you. And I haven't got social media on it and all that stuff. And then I've just attached a keyboard to it and touch, because just trying and being online is probably bad as well. So it's not helping authors, all this stuff.
No, I know.
I'm quite a techie person, because I've got lights here, and I love the idea that I've actually got a spotlight. Look at that. Isn't that brilliant?
That is great. We interviewed Hathi Mohammed a couple of hours ago with Ian Dale. And when we got the line up, he was filling his fountain pen. And he only writes with a fountain pen. And he showed us the pen. And it's one of those ones where it's not a little bubble that you put the air in and suck the ink out. It's one with a little lever. And that took me back. I have no idea how many years since I last used a fountain pen, and so maybe that's what you should be doing, and then you wouldn't see the Twitter at all.
Yeah, no, well, I've sorted the Twitter by having a different device, although that seems very, very silly. But but what happens when he needs to delete? And I mean, also the other thing is, I'm just thinking of his first book and what he's sending to the publisher, because I'm not sure even as a publisher, you're going to look at something that's written with fountain pen. I really don't. But I love the idea he's doing that. I think that would probably be more efficient. Yeah. And you'd also have to choose words more carefully, because you don't want to go back and put a line through it. It's interesting, isn't it, that we haven't, despite all the technology, we haven't really moved on. I tried the dictation thing. Doesn't work, because spoken words are different from written words. And I saw David Cameron, who I interviewed about his book, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to do a very bad impression. Isn't he a dragon typing fantastic? And it's brilliant. I mean, just straight through." And I thought, yeah, actually, funny enough, when I read his book, I did think it sounded like he was speaking to me, because it had that quite loose style, and I'm not sure that's suitable for print, But there we are, each to his own.
How much did you have to rewrite it? Well, the first question is, how did you feel when the publisher said, yes, we will publish this? But then when they told you, but actually you've got to do a really big rewrite.
I felt good when they said they publish it, but I now know, because you mentioned I had a couple of books out, sort of which were biographical or non-fiction. I know that that's the start of the process, and I think it's really one of the, I mean, I was talking to an author the other day who's very established, and she said there is no humiliation you will not go through to get a book in the hands of a reader, and it's true. And what I now know, because I'd had my previous experiences, when you put the final full stop on it, and yes, if the publisher says yes, that's lovely, is that's the beginning. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to say, we like it, but. And the but is you've got to listen very closely, because they're not going to let you get away with just saying, oh, fine, thanks very much. They're going to want something, redrawn and reshaped, and that's right. It's very unlikely that without a publisher on board, I could write something entirely publishable at first go. So there was a lot of, and this is another of these technology issues, because they use Microsoft, is it Docs? What's the one with all the previous versions? Yeah. So, oh my goodness. So you're, in the end, it looks like an act of vandalism, because you click on something and then that clicks on something else, and then you approve the change, or you change, and you just long for the moment. There's the most beguiling button which just says delete all changes, and you keep hovering and you think, what would they say if I just did this? So yeah, you go through all that. But in the end, I mean, as a broadcaster, this is the case with you, Torin, as well, I know, you kind of understand that you work under production and that you're all the better for it. And I think I read my hero Elvis Costello's biography a couple of years ago, and I thought, actually funny, Paxman's book is a little bit like this. I thought, I wonder if the publisher's been too frightened to go near them, because you could see certain bits of it that could have been improved. Both great books. But with Elvis Costello, I thought, I don't think he's one of the great artists. I don't think I would say to Elvis Costello, we don't like chapter 13. So you just publish the whole thing. And he probably just said, look, this is what I'm doing. Here it is. That's it. And I think all of us benefit from the production process. But you're right. So there's a big tangle on Microsoft Docs. I did at some point do something that accidentally, I think, reversed all of the publisher's changes. Her name was Hannah. So that we had to go back a square from that. And then you get to the business of even the title. I mean, I've given up even trying to work out what a book should be called, because I've never successfully found a title publishers like. So my idea, this book should be called The Replacement, because it's about the diver, the young American replacing the stuntman. For whatever reason, they didn't like that, so they called it The Diver and the Lover. And then the photo is theirs, and the font is theirs. The font is, I mean, they said, what sort of fonts do you like? And I thought, well, I mean, anyone I know is Times New Roman. I wouldn't use that. So, yeah, and it just goes on and on. And suddenly it arrives, And then also the other curious, weird thing, of course, is that we're in lockdown. And I mean, I suppose in an ideal world, you want to think that your book goes into shops and people buy it in shops. But as an author, funnily enough, the most satisfaction you can have is putting it into somebody's hands and having them say, can you sign it there? And then if they've read it and they ask you to sign a read copy, that could be even more exciting. And gosh, all authors, there's a lot of books that come out in the last week or so, as you know. We're missing that so much. And anyone who's watching, who's bought my book, I'm really grateful. And I hope, you'll be in touch and we can hook up and you can tell me what you think of it. But, just not having the handshake. This is centuries since we haven't been able to do this. This is nuts.
It is. So we will sell. We are tied up with Waterson's online, so your book is on there, and people can just click and add you to their basket. So I hope that they will do that. Waterson's in Chiswick are not doing signings, but I'm sure they will display your book if they haven't done that already. A couple of final questions. Have the film rights gone yet? Is the first of them?
Well, of course, you've tapped into my deepest fantasy there, which is that somebody makes a film of it. And I must admit, when I was writing it, I thought I've got to think about this in terms of the picture, not the painting, but the picture it creates, and in a sort of cinematographical way. I suppose, I just love cinema more than ever now. I've got such a thing for it. I think it was Parasite winning the Oscar was the last moment before lockdown. And the very last thing we did, Rachel and I, was go to Barnes Cinema and watch it. That was March the 22nd. And then the world's changed. So no, they haven't, but I would love them to. And
Okay,
if anyone does buy it, thank you first of all for those who are watching and buy it through Waterstones, and I appreciate that very much. And do get in touch. Torin can pass you along, and I can write something and send it to you, and you can put it in the book or whatever, because I don't want you to feel the lack of a personal touch. I'm aware that buying a book and reading it is a personal touch from the reader to the author. So please don't feel like I've gone missing in action.
Yeah. And did you say you're on Sunday brunch tomorrow? Have you got many other things lined up?
Yeah, there's lots of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of appetite generally for interviews, and there's quite a lot of interest in new books, which is good. And I think the book industry, I don't know if it's Audible or just generally that bookshops have survived to some extent this terrible ravaging of the high street that's happened, not corona related, but just generally. So yeah, there is. It's funny enough, I'm doing a drive-in festival. So the Appledore Book Festival, which I'm a patron of, is doing drive-in events. So I don't know what happens if you're laughing, you've got to flash your headlights or something. I don't know. But we'll see. Hopefully by next year we're out of this. Go on, Ian Dale told you.
Ian Dale's doing the Appledore, and he told us that he's doing it too. So look out for him. Look out for him there. My final question is: I presume you're going to get lots of sales in the Kelvingrove Gallery in Glasgow.
Well, do you know, I when I was up there last weekend, with their permission, I did a little Facebook post on my Facebook page, and which is the one that's the Jeremy Vine, by the way, in case you want to look it up. So it's the sort of public one. And I was stunned this morning to look at it, and it had more than 100,000 hits, which is a lot for me. And I thought, I think it's just because that painting is very, very special to people. And there are lots of people who've come to me and said they remember the first time they saw it. I know Billy Connolly's given an interview on it, saying it's the greatest work of art in Scotland. Kirsty Walk told me she was 5 when she first saw it. So for her, she's looking up at this extraordinary painting above her. But of course, the perspective of the painting is looking down. So she said it was completely befuddling. So it's a much loved painting, and the most moving message I've had since I had the book out was from somebody yesterday who said that they've just finished it, and because they're feeling bereft, they've got a train ticket up to Glasgow to see the painting. And I thought, oh my goodness, if even one person sees it because of my book, I would be so chuffed. But yeah, the painting is sort of accidentally at the centre. Love story with a painting. That's how I describe it.
Jeremy Vine, thank you very much. It's been wonderful to talk to you. We've had, as I say, a double bill of fiction. Our next session at 2 o'clock is very much non-fiction. Ariana Neumann, her memoir of her father's war and what remains when time stopped. She'll be talking to Anne Sever. That will be a memorable occasion as well. But in the meantime, Jeremy, thank you very, very much.
Thanks so much. And hello to everyone who's watched us. Thank you so much. Take care.